All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you like that intro music, always trying to keep things interesting here at All Tech is Human. My name is David Ryan Polgar. I'm sitting here in Manhattan where our nonprofit is based. Our nonprofit is focused on bringing together people, organizations, and ideas to tackle wicked tech and society issues at the speed of tech. A highly collaborative, this idea of collective intelligence that can build community and change systems, and it can be really, really powerful. One of the great privileges that I have at All Tech is Human is interacting with a fascinating wide range of people. Tobias Rose-Stockwell is one of those great individuals. Tobias has just released a book called Outrage Machine. I had the opportunity to be in New York for Tobias's book launch, which had a fabulous conversation, and I thought, well, we should bring him to the All Tech is Human community to discuss where's the next step for social media. We know that social media has a lot of promise, but a lot of peril. And we have individuals like Tobias who've been working in the kind of social media space and has a fascinating history with it that gives him key insight of potentially what we could do in the future. What could we do to improve the situation? So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Tobias Rose-Stockwell. Tobias, welcome to our live stream. Actually, the inaugural one for our new author series, where we're really trying to talk to people like yourself who have come out with books that are all about responsible tech, improving social media, responsible AI. We got the book right here. There we go. Outrage Machine. Gotta do the plug. Really enjoyed the read. And what I definitely took away from it, because I definitely want to also read the subtitle, talks about Outrage Machine, how tech amplifies discontent and disrupts democracy, and what we can do about it. Let's underline that part, and what we can do about it. At All Tech is Human, our tagline we like to say is, let's co-create a better tech future. This idea that we've got wicked problems, complex problems that sometimes seem intractable, sometimes seem so impossible to solve, but the idea that if we can come together and have this consensus and have this connectivity and collective intelligence, one person can't do it alone, but if we come together, we have all different expertise that comes together and allows us to attack this issue. So Tobias, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, David. It's awesome to be here.
Well, I'm, like I said, honored that you accepted the invitation for this conversation, and welcome to everyone who is tuning in. Feel free to use the comment sections. We'll try to bring up a few of the comments right here on our screen. First off, Outrage Machine just came out, doing extremely well. But we also know that there's been a lot of conversation. There's a lot of books on this topic. There's a lot of movies on this topic. A lot of people are familiar with movies like Coded Bias. You also have The Social Dilemma on Netflix. What was really the underlying reason why you thought, hey, I need to write a book, right? Because as you talked about at your book launch, certainly not a easy process to write a book. It's a labor of love, really. So what made you think, you know what, I've got something to offer that maybe is different, that's unique? So I'm curious from your end, Tobias, what are you hoping to kind of offer to the reader that you think is not currently met?
Yeah, so it was rather difficult writing a book about such a hot, extremely fast-changing topic like the problems of social media. But this was not a quick turnaround. This was actually a 6-year project for me, from start to finish. It really was an enormous undertaking, and I was trying to answer the question beyond kind of the more contemporary tech polemics and conversations that seem to be in the mainstream news right now. I really wanted to ask the question: have we been here before? What are the elements of our current informational chaos that can be we can look to the past and see if there's actually patterns that have held across different eras in time. This is a very unique moment in terms of the way that technology is infiltrating our lives and the way that particularly social media has dramatically influenced how we make sense of the world. But I was struck, and I read a huge number of history books in the process of this. I actually became a real history nerd in the process of writing this book, and went very, very deep on a lot of kind of historical accounts of media disruptions, just to try to figure out what are the potential patterns and lessons we can take away from the past when we have gone through major periods of informational chaos. And there are absolutely reasons to think that this moment is different, but it turns out there are a lot of echoes and real learnings that we can take from previous moments of media disruption, and apply those patterns, I think, to today, and figuring out how to fix where the problems we're facing now.
So are you kind of in particular thinking about books like Future Shock, which came out in the 70s, kind of talking about this new time? How can we as humans really digest such a vast amount of information, but also just the disruption? Is that kind of what you're thinking, or is there anything else you really
yeah. Yeah, I mean, so there are turns out there's a lot of similarities to this moment of kind of chaos and disruption that we're facing. If you go back and we were all born into this information environment that took over 100 years to really be established, which is kind of the mainstream media structure. That's usually used as a pejorative today. I don't use it as that, but we have this very structured, centralized system of media that we were born into largely, right? That we assume that most of the news that we see is verified, is fact checked, is corroborated. And when social media came along, 10 years ago, when it really took off, that we didn't have the cultural antibodies or kind of cultural intelligence to parse what was different about the type of media we were getting, from our friends, from our neighbors, from our uncles, and from strangers, as different from what media does, what actually mediated information does historically. So in the book, I go back actually pretty far. I go back as far as the printing press, and then I go through a bunch of major media disruptions that have happened since then, to try to really unpack what are the core transitions, what did it feel like in those moments, what happened that allowed for us to cohere again, right? What happened for us to kind of to figure out that, first of all, there's a problem, and second of all, like how do you manage total informational chaos when you can't actually trust the information that you're getting on a regular basis? And it turns out there are a bunch of really interesting lessons that you can pull from these periods. Small example, if you go back as far as the printing press, for instance, Martin Luther, he was a great orator and a very interesting man. But if he hadn't been alive at the time of the printing press, then he probably would have been excommunicated and killed for his views on the Catholic Church. But he never intended on his kind of diatribe against the Catholic Church, his 95 Theses, to really be this mainstream kind of media controversy. When you look at what happened when he wrote down these 95 Theses, they went viral, and they went viral because of the printing press, right? In this moment, in this, virality, I put that in quotes in the context of today, because virality is a different thing today than it was then. But by the standards of the time, they absolutely went viral. And if you look at them today, they absolutely resemble a modern Twitter thread. They're 95 points. They're character delimited. That each one kind of is a little chunk of outrage about what is wrong with the Catholic Church. And it really shows that, from its earliest days, media loves controversy, right? That was the first viral media. And the reason it spread, and this was no engagement algorithms, this was just a bunch of print shops trying to make money, newly minted print shops trying to make money. They would print this stuff because it sold. And he became one of the most popular authors in Europe during that time. And you could also argue based on the kind of cascades of change that came on the heels of that, that the printing press was one of the most violent inventions that hit Europe up until that point, right? So it caused this disruption caused by the new ability to spread information far and wide, caused almost 100 years of civil wars. It totally reorganized society, and it was extremely disruptive. It was extremely hard to try to figure out what was actually happening in the world at that moment in time. So it really did reformat the way we look at the world. And it, you know, I go back and kind of try to take the reader back in time to this particular moment in which there was two things that were just shockingly apparent to people. One was that identities, like the kind of sense of identity of who people were, was incredibly salient. So people had a real deep sense of kind of threats to their identities, who people were. You're Catholic, Protestant, Grindletonian, Quaker, like all of these different crazy sects that exploded during that period. And then also just misinformation was everywhere. Misinformation was more common than real information, than actual than qualified information at that moment in time. So yeah, and you can see what happened and how kind of society reoriented itself. And throughout the book, I go through a bunch of these periods, the 1930s, the 1890s, the 1830s as well. And there's these very, very interesting moments of just like pretty much like total information chaos. And each one required a different set of solutions in order to navigate our way through.
I guess what I'm curious about, and you talk about really kind of how sometimes the medium can alter our own kind of behavior, is how much do we end up adjusting our own human behavior of communication based on that potential for virality? Because in the book, I think right after you go into the printing press, I know later on you talk about the story of Upworthy, like 10 or so years ago, the idea that virality sometimes can be used to spread positivity or positive stories. But at the same time, it tends to be individuals who are using the quote unquote kind of dark arts kind of side of things to say, okay, this is how I can kind of hack this system. Maybe I took a course by, I think you mentioned like Nereal's kind of work. How do we kind of adjust to that? I mean, I think I've always been personally kind of fascinated with this idea of, do we post what we like or do we post what will be liked? This concept that we are kind of mediating our entire posting through the perception of how it will be, how it's going to land, as opposed to kind of the straight authenticity of what we might intentionally feel, right? So like later on, you talk about kind of the power of algorithms, right? So are we sometimes just kind of trying to align our own emotional output with how we think that emotional output will have a either positive or negative kind of outcome at the end? Kind of curious for you to dig into that of how you think that alters people's behavior, whether you think the examples like Upworthy are a net positive, or if you think that we need to kind of change the underlying kind of structure.
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question and a really fascinating one. Also, there's this phenomena online that I think we've all been exposed to some degree, which is, when you are posting content online, we are signal processing machines. We're looking for signal from our audiences when we are posting. And there's something strange that happens when we get a hit, when our content gets noticed. It's this amazing feeling of kind of resonance with our audience in which we've done something good, right? It feels like a very good and positive signal most of the time, unless you go viral for something that's like maybe more, like that can get you canceled or whatever else. But most of the time when we go viral, it is this extremely significant positive signal that we get. And yeah, so one of the things I explore in the book is how that signal actually trains us, how it actually is turning us into kind of response machines as opposed to agents on our own, right? So there's a phenomenon known as audience capture that a number of people have spoken about recently, but you can find it if you look back. There's a very particular set of tweets, for instance, that Donald Trump did in 2011. if you track the number of retweets that he gets, you can kind of zone in on this particular era of time in his life when he was kind of your average celebrity. We've known who Donald Trump is for a very long time. But as you read through his tweets, they're pretty average tweets. It's like you know, watch me on The View tomorrow, you know, drink Trump wine, check out my new property in Soho. It's going to be great. And totally average celebrity tweets going down.
Just like corporate speak, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. And, you know, who knows if he was making them or if he had someone on his team doing them. But in 2011, in June of 2011, he was, I believe, watching Fox News. And he was watching Fox News, and he got mad about something that he saw on Fox News. I think it was an opinion show about Barack Obama. And he tweeted something about Barack Obama being a radical. And before that point, his tweets were getting an average of about 40 or 50 retweets. And that tweet suddenly gets 2,000 retweets. All right, 2,000 retweets over 2,000 likes. And so Trump, right, as any good kind of, you know, audience evaluating machine, is like, oh, wow, this is actually important. I should maybe say more of this, right? And you can actually watch a steady increase in the kind of tenor and transition of his tweets, going from standard celebrity speak to more and more and more outraged types of conversations and types of commentary about what is happening with the presidency and other places. So you can actually see this transition happen in real time. And it's a very interesting transition because we actually have the records of his tweets, and you can see that there is this very strong signal that he's getting from his audience. And like, we know who Trump is. We've known who he is for, you know, my entire adult life. He's always been in the public eye. You know, he was a Democrat for a while. He was Republican for a little while. He was independent for a while. He's jumped around a lot. But one thing has been very clear is that he has been very interested in the media. He wants to find an audience. He wants to be in front of the cameras, right? And Twitter actually provided him with a very special set of conditions for finding an audience, right? That actually responded so strongly to a certain type of persona, a certain type of kind of attitude that he was putting out there. I really do think that Twitter trained Trump. As much as Trump used Twitter, Twitter was also using Trump to some degree and turning him into the strange kind of, you know, bombastic, aggressive person that he is today. And I think you can find that phenomenon all over the place on social media, where we want to actually, like, we want to be creating things that the world finds useful, and we do something online, and we're always testing different things when we post online, right? You can imagine, you know, that sense of when you're actually posting online, that feeling where you're like, how do I craft this to make it good? How do I craft it to make it pop? What's the best, you know, how do I make this like slightly more viral? And we're all
A/B testing that you were talking about in the book, right? That all publications. I know we both wrote for a few publications, I think Quartz at the time, and I think that's where actually some of your work that preceded Outrage Machine did extremely well. Probably led to some of this discussion. And I guess that's what I would kind of find fascinating. And then I'm going to bring up, if you don't mind, a question that we have from the audience from Ann Collier. But one of the things I was thinking about, Tobias, before this discussion today is even your own experience, right? Here you're somebody who's deeply thinking about these issues. I know Burning Man has been a major part of your life and thinking about kind of culture, interconnectivity. But do you struggle with the very fact that now, as an author, you're having to kind of fit within the system of getting people to read your book, talk about your book, book you for media, gigs? So how do you kind of deal with that kind of natural tension, right? Just this idea I've seen over the last year, decade, discussing kind of impact of social media, is that we seem to always struggle, especially with the younger audience, that, you know, sometimes we're being told to be a brand, but at the same time, that can be very dehumanizing. So the same thing, right? I imagine you have to kind of deal with, wait a minute, like I know how this system works, but I also know that I want to be like a respectful human and interact with the world in an authentic manner. But at the same time, you would have this natural pressure. And I think that's the way a lot of people probably feel, that they have pressure for a sense of virality, right? They have bosses that are telling them to get more hits, to get more followers. how does that impact your own life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some interesting anecdotes from those early days. Back, I did a bunch of articles early on, kind of about this strange phenomena of how to optimize your own ideas and messages to reach a larger audience, and how the news industry actually in general was bowing and bending a lot to the pressures of audience capture in a big way. There, one fairly salient and kind of dark quote I had from a millennial focused publisher, from an editor of a millennial focused publisher, told me, he's like, it's not our job to challenge your biases. It's our job to ride them as far as they can go, because if that produces engagement, if that produces good clicks and good click-through rates and good ad revenue, then you're golden. That's what their job is, right? And so that is kind of a core piece of the book, is actually unpacking how our general attention economy, even the news, which we rely upon for such critical sense-making abilities, for understanding what is actually happening in the world, is prone to this same kind of dance and manipulation and trying to capture our attention. So yeah, I really have been trying to kind of to tangle with that for quite a while. And yeah, of course, in the process of writing this book and putting it out there, I need to package it in a way that actually will sell and be interesting and be helpful to people. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a key difference, fortunately, to some degree, between long form content and short form content, right? There's actually some kind of innate affordances that certain type of content gives you, right? If it's a long form content, it actually tends to switch our brains into kind of system 2 processing, slower thinking, as opposed to this very fast kind of attentional cycling.
Yeah, the reptile, right? The lizard brain versus the owl brain.
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of content online, a lot of social media is built entirely to just kind of keep us in this really, really short attention span, momentary hits of dopamine framework, which is not, I think, really that great for sense making at all, right? You need to be able to think deeply on things. You need to be reflective. You need to have a sense of context much of the time. And when things are squeezed into the boxes of social media, they lose context. They clearly lose tremendous context, and that's like opportunity for miscommunication and an opportunity for confusion too for a lot of us. So that's I think that one of the real core problems that we're facing right now is that we're squeezing so much of reality into these tiny little boxes that are not reflective of real life.
Yeah, but do you think that there's a natural pushback from a lot of people? Because if you look at Twitter/X, that obviously is going through a lot of turmoil. Some people are talking about Threads getting 100 million users really quickly, but maybe the numbers kind of going down there. It does seem like for a lot of people, and I think pieces on this, that a lot of that type of social media might be kind of flatlining, or maybe that's changing. Maybe the web naturally goes through a lot of disruptions. And then also when you mention kind of these BuzzFeedy types of media outlets, well, they've really struggled. So the BuzzFeeds of the world haven't done well, right? They did well 10 years ago. So what do you attribute that to? Is that individuals coming together to say, hey, this is something that we don't really find aligned with how we want to interact? Is this just a natural evolution? Because I mean, I imagine that could also give a sense of hope, really, for a lot of your messages, that, all right, well, maybe we are kind of starting to adjust to this and determining what positive connection looks like. Because I mean, you go over in your book that you yourself had a very early experience with virality, with your experience in Cambodia and some of the crowdsourced type of idea, and crowdfunding has become such a larger kind of concept. Could you briefly kind of touch upon that, how it informed you? And then I just want to also get to Anne's question as well.
Sure. Yeah. So this book actually started quite a long time ago in terms of my interest in this topic. I had a very strange experience going viral when I was very young, in the earliest days of social media. And I say earliest in that, like, Twitter and Facebook hadn't even been invented yet. But I was a young backpacker. I was traveling through Southeast Asia, and I met this monk, this Cambodian monk, who was basically looking for help in rebuilding this reservoir. He brought me out to his village, kind of under the pretenses of a community visit. And when I got there, he put me in front of, he brought me this little pagoda with, several hundred common council village elders that were there, and kind of surprised me with this project that was quite unexpected. He was looking for help in rebuilding this giant irrigation system that had been destroyed during the Civil War there, during the Khmer Rouge. It was a very noble project, but I was a backpacker with no money. I was like 23 years old and I had no hydrology experience, no trust fund, anything like that. And he was looking for $15,000 to rebuild this reservoir. Mm-hmm. And this reservoir was like a big deal. It would have provided 6,000 people the second crop of rice, and that's like a pretty large scale impact for a lot of people there. Anyway, I was not the person to do it. I said, look, you have the wrong person. I'm not your guy, but I will at least be an advocate on your behalf, and I will talk to my friends about it. And so I went to the internet and I drafted an email, like a story with like some kind of impassioned language about this group of people in the middle of Cambodia that needed help. And that email landed in a listserv that some friends had built. One of those friends ended up being one of the first engineers at Twitter. But this listserv, if you look at today, it resembles a profile pictures, 250 friends of friends of friends connected by individual profile pages, and an independent feed, which was sourced by email. It was social media. It was an early social media network, early social media platform. Pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook. And anyway, this email went viral. It went like massively viral. And, me being this poor little backpacker and, with the plea from some monks, I ended up getting, strangers emailing me out of nowhere being like, this is amazing. How can I help? What can I do to help you solve this problem? And so it went from friends to friends of friends to friends of friends of friends. And this email actually ended up being kind of this catalyst for a tremendous amount of input and support for these monks. So as a result of that, I actually kind of reoriented my life. I'm like, okay, maybe I can actually do this. Maybe I do have this wealth of connection, the wealth of this network that I'm connected to. Maybe I can help these guys. And so I ended up going back home and just kind of doing a little bit of logistical work, and then immediately going back to Cambodia and starting to work on helping these monks. And I thought it would take 2 months and $15,000. I ended up living in Cambodia for almost 7 years and raising $250,000 for this reservoir. We raised over $1 million for this community overall. And a huge part of that came from this incredible viral connectivity of the internet, right? This ability to make an emotional plea and build a tremendous amount of support and interest in an otherwise hidden cause. And it turns out, I was very optimistic, very, very optimistic that kind of thing could be reproduced. So I moved, when I moved back to the Bay Area, I grew up near Silicon Valley and started working on projects that were in this space, being like, social media is amazing. There's these incredible, incredible tools that you can use to actually connect people. So again, I had a lot of early friends that were at these companies, and it was this era of very early euphoria about what these tools could do, right? And I think we all remember the Arab Spring. We remember how positive that felt at that moment in time, how it just felt like these tools could actually, bring the world together and connect us. But it turns out, if you can use emotional information online to connect people to otherwise hidden causes and like make big make big movements from small ideas with the right emotional packaging, you can also use that to do really terrible things too, right? So it's kind of the same dynamics that brought us the Arab Spring are in some ways the same dynamics that brought us January 6th, right? These tools are not just, they have their own agenda, but their agenda is not universally good. And so it really doesn't matter how we use them and the kind of affordances and the ways that we build the safeguards on them to keep them from being used for ill. So yeah, so I have a strange history with this stuff. I've been tangling with it for a long time, and
fascinating history.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's, it informs myself, as well, of just recognizing that with the community that we're building with All Tech is Human, we greatly benefit by having a Slack that has 73 countries represented with 6,000 members. And being able to interact and learn from and share resources with people that are in Nigeria and Kenya, where we have
Yeah,
people. And
absolutely.
I haven't been to those locations. It offers a great deal of beauty. And so that's what I really took away, especially towards the end of your book, when you talk about the kind of solution stage and where this is going,
Yeah.
is that you still remain, I don't want to say optimistic, but to the point that there's tremendous value that can be unlocked. But it's not, to quote a very famous infomercial, you can't set it and forget it. It doesn't
Right.
naturally lead to the, democracy spreading, or even in your example, your positive example in Cambodia, virality, with this sense of crowdfunding and a little bit of 6 Degrees, right? 6 Degrees, one of the first social media platforms, I think, before Friendster, based on that idea of 6 degrees of separation. We're
Right.
all actually connected. We're all, I think, 42nd cousins or less, if you actually do the math, which is very intriguing. But the point is, we have this kind of like potential, but how do we actually get to that? So lastly, I just want to bring up a quick question from Ann Collier. Ann, who has been heavily involved in the space of especially youth and media, and then youth in social media since the 90s, a tremendous amount of experience. She asked you, Tobias, from your historical perspective, does generative AI seem to be at an order of magnitude more disruptive, potentially, than social media? So a hot topic, obviously, with ChatGPT, ChatGPT-4, OpenAI, generative AI. So is this something new, or is it going to be the similar trajectory of the printing press that you had talked about before? Where are you leaning towards?
Right. Yeah. So definitely more disruptive. Absolutely more disruptive. I think that the power to confuse us from generative AI and large language models in general are far greater than anything that we've faced in the past. What I think is important to recognize is that the pipes, the way that we are actually confused, is how we are served information, and that is the network of social media as it stands right now. So we do have a handle on how we make sense of the world, because we make sense of it poorly currently with a lot of these tools that we've already built and that we're already familiar with. So getting a handle on how like using our best knowledge about the harms of social media, I think will mitigate a large number of the harms of generative AI in our sense-making capacity. I think that in industry in general, there's going to be tremendous upset economically and socially from these tools, but writ large, I think focusing on the pipe, so to speak, of how we actually get information and the frictions that are in place can actually make a huge difference there. What I want to offer is that any technology that's any disruptive technology, I go through this in the book, and this about halfway through, I start talking about how different technologies are metabolized by society, right? And pretty much universally, extremely disruptive technologies go through this period of kind of increase in interest and euphoria around their use, followed by mass adoption, and then a period of dropping off of human welfare for a period, right? So there's this period that I call a dark valley of hidden harm, in which the harms of the tools are actually hidden by their mass adoption and euphoria, right? And this period, it might last a few years, it might last a few decades, it might last a century. But eventually, we usually make it out on the other side and figure out how to mitigate the worst harms and end up better off. And with AI and with the kind of the rapid speed at which we are we're being exposed to these new technologies, they're a lot like superpowers, right? Like we're actually being blasted by new kind of mutant abilities on a weekly or monthly basis.
What's our Oppenheimer moment, if you saw the new movie Oppenheimer?
Right. No, totally. And so there's this period afterwards in which you can kind of universally expect there to be hidden harms, things that we did not think of, things that are problematic, that affect a lot of people simultaneously. And usually at the trough of that valley, there is some combination of moral panic, bad research into harms, good research into harms, and then eventually cultural antibodies and industry response and government response.
Mm-hmm.
Some combination of those three things that allow for us to start climbing out the other side and mitigate the worst parts. So we end up with the best parts of technology and not the worst parts of technology. We end up with just the good stuff, right? Or mostly just the good stuff. Not always just the good stuff, but mostly just the good stuff. And I think that pattern is going to hold, especially with these different iterations of AI, that we're going to be exposed to increasingly narrow dark valleys in which we're going to there's going to be becoming faster and faster and faster. So I think that the most important thing is to expect that we are going to be hitting these valleys. So don't think that we're going to be able to avoid them entirely, but expect them, and then and try to make them shallower, as in less harm, and shorter, as in less time. And I think if we do that, we can model out how the future can be a safer place for all of us, and not just be a total chaotic, confusing place for all of us. So.
Well said. Yeah, and it also seems like, how do we speed up our ability to consider these kind of social impacts?
Exactly.
To your point, if innovation now is speeding up and all of these new kind of harms are happening, how do we, as policymakers, create these safeguards and better understanding norms of behavior? But lastly, let's get to the future thinking, where this is headed. You kind of leave it in a note of what we can do about this. I'm just going to read a little bit from your book. This is chapter 29. So very well researched, a lot of chapters. You talk about what can we do, right? Quote, high-level solutions require a mix of high-level thinking and a very narrow understanding of the problems. We must look to the points of maximum leverage, the places where we can make the most impact. More specifically, the problems need to be looked at symptomatically, not generally. We all want silver bullets, but complex problems require very specific solutions. It's more realistic to focus on single solutions rather than system-wide ones. So very curious for you to kind of unpack your thinking about that, because that's what we're always kind of focused on, right? How do we think of these issues like holistically? It's a Rubik's Cube of all these interconnected parts. But to your point, it's true. We all do want a silver bullet. We're all looking to say, what can Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk do about this? Can they hit this magic button and then there's no misinformation, there's no hate speech, and then discounting this idea of human behavior and differences of how we even define free expression internally in the United States and then externally as a global community. So there's so many different parts of this puzzle. What's your kind of final kind of takeaway with where you think we're headed with the best ability to create solutions?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for us to think about this, like I said, symptomatically. You wouldn't, I like to think about our media system a little bit like a kind of functioning human body, right? And you wouldn't try to fix your broken arm with, athlete's foot spray, right? You wouldn't try to, fix an ulcer with a Band-Aid. You need to have very specific solutions for the problems that we're facing, for the harms that are visible to us. And I think that's what has been shown out, right, in the last 10 years of social media is that if you can identify, get very, very clear on the harms, and this is why academic research into the harms is so critically important, then you can actually look for proportional solutions to a lot of these things, right? There are some top level fixes that I think are a little bit more kind of governmental in nature that I think could actually help have this cascading effect downward. I think reforming Section 230 is really critically important, and increasing the liabilities on a lot of these tech platforms for the harms that come from their usage. That would actually just cause a dramatic set of internal changes to try to mitigate some of the worst stuff on the platforms. And I want to note that whenever it comes to content moderation issues, people are going to be angry about those things, and it really sucks getting deplatformed. It really sucks not feeling like we have a say in how these tools are designed as individual consumers. There's this kind of famous line, code is law, that you sometimes hear. Code is law. When code is deployed, we actually really don't have a choice but to follow it, right? Versus law in the wider world. Like I can choose to jaywalk or not to jaywalk, but when code is deployed, it is the law that you need to actually abide by. And that's not a great frame for us as individuals. Like we you know, as we're spending more of our time in these digital spaces, it's really important for us to have more of some degree of understanding and also say, I think, in the way these spaces are designed. You know, there's a bunch of amazing organizations. I want to like give a important kind of hat tip to a bunch of various organizations that are doing really important work on trust and safety. I really think that trust and safety teams are some of the most, it's one of the most important professions that we have, I think, in society right now, and so undervalued. And so many of these people actually really do understand what the negative impacts are of the work if it is left on its own, right? Of these platforms that are left on their own. So I really do, you know, hats up to Integrity Institute and a bunch of these different groups that all Center for Humane Tech, a bunch of these amazing groups. All Tech is Human, also a fantastic hub for centralizing these efforts. Really, really important. But I think it's very important to get as tight as possible on the harms. And I think, you know, I've had this experience a number of times looking at different potential interventions, some of which were adopted, and writing about them, some of which were adopted at Facebook and Instagram. Like if you can get really tight on the actual harm and you've got evidence for it, then you can really design around that harm. Yeah. And that's a very legible thing. The more legible the problem is, the more clear the solution becomes. And that's happened like across the board in many, you know, myriad, hundreds of different ways as we've used these platforms. You see a use case that is problematic, and you fix it. You can figure out ways. You can put the frictions in place. You can change the design. You can change the code, and you can actually fix it. And you can make things better for people. And I think that getting as kind of specific as possible on the actual harms is really important, which I do think is why we need more transparency. And I fully support these various projects that are working to get more transparency in these tech companies. They have no incentive to do it right now, and I think that does require government regulation to give more transparency for civil society, for academic groups, to actually get legible harms, like get legible information on the back end. And I think that there's going to be a lot of gaslighting, and there's going to continue to be a lot of, you know, smoke screens around this stuff. But it's so important for us to understand what the harms are from these tools, and that's really where I critically focus that government regulation right now, is getting access to the data.
Very well said. I think a good way to end our great conversation. I know we have so much we could continue to talk about, and hope to continue to engage with your fine work, Tobias. Also, lastly, just check out Outrage Machine. I believe you have outragemachine.org. What's next for you? How would you like people to kind of stay in touch with some of your work as this continues to build out?
Right. Yeah. If you go to outragemachine.org, you can sign up on my website, and I'll keep in touch. There's an email sign up, a Substack that I'm working on launching in the next few weeks. So really, really excited to keep the conversation going.
Terrific. Well, Tobias, thank you for this great conversation, and thank you everyone for your enthusiasm, and for tuning in, and for being part of, as Tobias is talking about, this collective solution to improve social media and make sure that it brings out the best in us. So, Tobias, thank you for coming on, and for everyone else, thank you for the conversation.